Hi everyone, I'm Muna.
Hello, Muna.
Hi. How are you all? Good, I'm glad. Okay, so I'm a political science, international studies major, and history bullshit, so bear with me. So Western interests in the Middle East have for too long plagued humanity. Even before 9/11 and the War on Terror, even before the fall of the Ottoman Empire in World War I, there was something called the Great Game, where the major powers of the world vied for control over the East. This began a legacy of imperialistic power struggles over the strategic region of the Middle East. It has evolved into something far more imperative, however, the fight for oil. The insane Western desperation for oil has blinded our leaders. We have been fooled into hating invisible enemies so that our military can secure our only interest in the region. And what has it cost us? What has it cost the world? Millions and trillions and bajillions of dollars, millions of innocent dead, not only physically but psychologically. America is seen as a Goliath only capable of violence. How much longer can we continue to support US intervention where our soldiers are dying or coming back mentally destroyed? Our public interests are being ignored for the sake of ISIS, Al-Qaeda, and the Taliban, which the US created.
Yep.
Our tax money turning into the screams and blood of innocent people. One country in the world has over 1,000 military bases. Since 1945, we have attempted to overthrow over 50 governments, if that. With this violent resurgence of US involvement in Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, Palestine, as American citizens and citizens of the world, it is our duty to call on Obama to end the destruction of millions of civilians in the region and to our own military, economy, and international standing. Thanks, guys.
Money for jobs and education,
Not for war and occupation.
money for jobs and education,
Not for war and occupation.
money for jobs and education,
Not for war and occupation.
money for jobs and education,
Not for war and occupation.
money for jobs and education,
Not for war and occupation.
money for jobs.
Okay,
Yeah.
if everybody would please welcome Wilvin Wagner.
So today the protest was planned because this is the anniversary of the U.S. invasion of Afghanistan. And in addition, the U.S. has been bombing Syria, of course, as everybody knows, and the U.S. has been bombing Iraq as well, ostensibly to punish or try to destroy the terrorist group ISIS, the Islamic State. But one common thread that runs between all of the situation in Afghanistan and in Syria and in Iraq is that once upon a time, actually not the so distant future, but in the last 20, 30, or 40 years in all these cases, all these countries were very stable. They weren't the best places to live probably, but they were stable. And the people that live there were able to lead relatively normal lives, just like we are able to here, to go to work, to have families, to have kids. And in all three of these cases, US intervention has caused a civil war in the country and basically decades of violence and suffering and death for the populations that live there. Syria, of course, is more recent. This hasn't been decades, but now several years that due to US and Saudi, Turkish and other intervention, the regular Syrian civilians are paying an extremely high price just for the United States to basically try to realize their interests and to fight proxy wars against various enemies that we have decided that we're opposed to, largely for economic or ideological reasons. In the case of Afghanistan, it goes all the way back to the late 70s and 80s when there was a communist regime in Afghanistan that the US decided to destabilize with the help of the Saudis and the Pakistanis by creating jihadist militant groups that would fight against the Afghan government, deliberately trying to induce the Soviet Union to invade. That caused war and then later civil war and strife and bloodshed in Afghanistan that still is going on today. And again, rather than recognizing that it's US intervention that has caused the problems in these countries, when there is continued violence and when radical groups that, again, we had a hand in creating are causing havoc and murdering people, nobody seems to realize that the solution would be for the US not to intervene anymore, but instead they decide that the solution is for us to intervene more, drop more bombs, kill more people. And again, that same pattern took place in Iraq, and the same pattern now more recently is taking place in Syria. Even though the Assad government had, plenty of flaws and committed plenty of human rights abuses, it was still a good country to live in. Iraqi refugees that were leaving Iraq as a result of the war there would go to Syria, and going to Syria was like being in heaven for them because life was so good there compared to the hell that they had left in Iraq. And once again, the United States has decided, along with the Saudis and other countries, have decided to destabilize Syria, induce a civil war, and now, of course, we're bombing it directly. And there's, obviously a chance that that intervention could spread and not simply be limited to bombing ISIS forces or locations, but that may possibly extend to bombing the Syrian government held areas as well, and trying to continue the effort to depose the Assad government. But again, in these situations, it's just important to remember that there are people just like us that are living in these countries that bear the brunt of US violence, that are on the wrong end of US bombs, that are on the wrong end of US M16s, that are on the wrong end of US Apache helicopters and tanks. And even though some of the groups that are operating in Syria and Iraq now, most specifically ISIS, are terrible, terrible groups, it's not going to help anything for the US to expand the violence and continue to expand war, just like it didn't help in Afghanistan, just like it didn't help in Iraq. And unfortunately, we can only hope that in Syria there won't end up being a million dead like there are in Iraq, even though there's maybe already 200,000. We can only pray that it won't get to as bad as it was in Iraq or as bad as it has been in Afghanistan for the last 30 years. So again, it's important, I think, to just remember there are just regular people there that just want to go to school, that just want to work their jobs, that just want to raise their kids. And that's something that the folks in Washington and the war planners obviously don't give a shit about. As long as the bombs are dropping, the defense companies are making their money, and the US is advancing its geopolitical interests to try to undermine our enemies, again, in this case Syria and especially Iran. Unfortunately, the bombs keep falling, and that's, of course, what we all need to try to resist. So.
Occupation is a crime!
From Iraq to Palestine!
Occupation is a crime!
From Iraq to Palestine!
Occupation is a crime!
From Iraq to Palestine!
Occupation is a crime!
Thank you, everybody. So I'm here to basically share 3 lessons I've had as being an anti-war activist. I got my start when I was in high school. I was there when 9/11 happened, and then the United States in 2003 wanted to invade Iraq. And even then I had a disposition that was against that. Even though at the time it was basically for vague reasons like, oh, they just want the oil. It turns out they just wanted the oil. And there was just that thing. So lesson 1 that I want to share is that the United States is by no means a humanitarian organization. Every time you hear of a crisis going on in the world, there are many crises going on in the world at all times. The United States will pick and choose by its own moral compass where it wants to intervene and for what reasons. It's supported dictators around the world in Indonesia and in Chile, but when it comes to Assad in Syria, we have to get that guy. The real question is, why do we have to get that guy? Why did we have to get Saddam Hussein in Iraq? Why did we have to go into Afghanistan? And the list goes on, right? So we've basically built up ourselves as this heroic organization that has to go in, fight the bad guys, and save lives and defeat enemies of liberty and democracy. But it's a sham. It's always been a sham, and it always will be a sham. So the sooner we recognize the United States is not a humanitarian organization, the better. Anytime the United States wants to get involved in the world, we should have that instinct that says, no, this is wrong. No, it's wrong. It's always wrong when the United States gets involved. The second lesson I'm here to share tonight is that the United States doesn't even uphold basic democratic rights within its own borders. The United States likes to defend democracy. We like to get the international community behind us, and we like to go kick some ass and, instill democracy in these countries because they're just begging for it. The fact of the matter is, we don't have democracy in this country on the level that they want to basically sell to the rest of the world. It's worth noting that there are anti-war activists in this country who have been thrown in front of a grand jury, not even, in this lifetime. It happened in our lifetimes. This isn't some McCarthy era, let's attack the communists. This isn't the sedition era of World War I. It's today. It's the here and now. It's women like Razmea Oda who are being attacked by the Department of Justice for basically saying that, hey, I'm immigrating to the United States, and if I'm tortured by the Israelis who are illegally occupying my country, that's a thing. So the point being is that the United States doesn't even grant democratic rights to women, doesn't grant democratic rights to people of color, and it just doesn't grant democratic rights to anybody who can't afford them and who can't pay for them outright with all their wealth. So that's the second lesson. And then the third lesson is that the United States war has always been business as usual. George W. Bush is something we always hear about is, yeah, man, he started the Iraq War, he started the Afghanistan War, and he was just a horrible warmonger, and he made all his pals, rich. He got Halliburton behind him, and, they just got rich off of it. But when Barack Obama was elected president, the wars ended, right? No. The wars were over, right? No, it doesn't matter who's in office. It only matters what Wall Street wants. Wall Street wants war, and it doesn't care if it's a Barack Obama versus George W. Bush who does it. They will take this country to war to defend our national interests and secure our resources and spread democracy. It doesn't matter whether it's a Democrat or it's a Republican in office, and what we should learn from this is we can't vote these kind of things away, right? It's actions like this in the streets is where we're actually going to make history. Even when the news isn't rolling here paying attention to us, we're still here to make history. So, that said, the three lessons I have are that the United States is not a humanitarian organization, the United States won't defend democratic rights for anybody within its own borders, and that finally, the United States has and always been in the business of making war, no matter if it's a Democrat or it's a Republican in office. Thank you very much for your time. I appreciate everybody being here.
All right, I want to thank everyone for being out here today. My name is Gregory Lucero. I'm speaking on behalf of the Freedom Road Socialist Organization. And you've got to keep in mind something really important of you being here. We're in Utah. We're in Utah where George W. Bush had a positive approval rating until he left office, basically. And to see so many people out here in the streets standing up against war and occupation is something fantastic. So let's hear it for all of you. So there's a couple things I want to talk to you about. The first thing I want to talk to you about is this system. What this system is and why it functions. Because you can't understand war deeply without understanding this system. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about imperialism. I'm going to talk about when we hear boots on the ground, what it really means. Boots on the ground in Afghanistan, boots on the ground in Syria, boots on the ground in Ferguson. And I'm going to talk to you about exactly what an intervention means. And then finally, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what we can do to stop those interventions. And we can stop them. And not only can we stop them, we must stop them. So we always hear that we live in a democracy. And it's a certain kind of democracy. It's a democracy as all democracies in rich, powerful countries have been. It's democracy of the slaveholders. Just like in ancient Greece or the Roman Republic that we always hear about, that's where our founding fathers drew their inspiration. Well, they did draw it because those were places with slaves and oppressed people that went into other nations, tore up the place, and took their stuff. And we live in exactly that kind of democracy. It's a democracy for the rich because we live under capitalism. And what is capitalism but the institutionalized political, social, and economic system of the rule for the rich, by the rich, and of the rich. And we can talk about democracy in Afghanistan and Syria or Palestine, but the real fact of the matter is we need to be also talking about democracy in America, a real democracy, an economic democracy, a political democracy, and a social democracy in which we, the everyday working class people, the people who clean the toilets and clean the streets and build the buildings, make the decisions about how our society is run. Because we live under a system that is a parasite. It is a wild dog looking for flesh and meat for the rich. And the United States can talk about all sorts of democracies, but when they talk about that, they're just hungry again for another $1 trillion that we paid, not the big corporations, not the rich elites, we paid to go right into their pocket, given to them by the US government, just so they could have more. How many yachts do they need? How many planes do they need? How many summer homes do they need? Well, the answer is more. They always want more. And when they can't take it from us, when we're too broke, just like the economic crisis of 2008, they get hungry and start looking at the rest of the world. And when they target the rest of the world, the name of this is imperialism. It is war, it is bloodshed, it is assassination, it is rigging elections. And it is CIA and State Department-backed organizations murdering and causing riots and causing protests that hurt people just like me and you. So this is the second point. This imperialism is the root, the core, the dark beating heart that pumps the sick, putrid blood through this entire system. They can talk, and we'll just say, yeah, ISIS, those are a bunch of really bad dudes. And Assad, yeah, he's a bad dude. And Saddam Hussein, yeah, he's a bad dude. And the Taliban, yeah, there's some bad dudes. I'm gonna let you finish, but there ain't nobody badder, more bloodthirsty, more evil in the world than the United States government and the things that it does all around the world.
Of all time.
Of all time. So we need to keep that in mind. How are self-motivated, greedy, hungry warmongers and murderers going to fix anything?
They won't.
They won't. And a brother earlier talked about it. He said, yeah, there's a crisis in Syria. There's a crisis in Iraq with, ISIS doing horrible, terrible things, right? But how are the people who funded, armed, and trained those people suddenly going to fix the very problem using the very methods they used to create it? How can you think that the very people who do these bad things and want to do these bad things are suddenly going to have this change of heart? Do anyone here believe that the US government has had some change of heart?
Hell no.
Do Do you believe that they're going to actually make lives better for people in those countries?
No!
And when they say we need to go to war, what are you going to say?
Hell no!
That's right. That's exactly right. So we have to think about this. We can look at all the bad regimes in the world. We can see all the problems, all the contradictions, all the, oppression, whatever. Everything bad in the world. We can think about that. We can see it all around the world because almost every country lives under this system of capitalism and lives under this system of imperialism. And these countries that live under imperialism, either they're imperialists, they're big dogs out on the prowl, or they're little dogs that are trying to grow and become a big dog. And we can see that with Saudi Arabia, Turkey, Qatar funding these groups. And just because they're a bunch of bad dudes, and let's be honest, Saudi Arabia has beheaded more people than ISIS, and they're one of the closest allies in the region, right? So they're just looking to get their piece of the pie. And we can say that's bad, and we should say that's bad. But we've got to remember, we don't live in Saudi Arabia, we don't live in Qatar, we live in the United States of America. And the main enemy is always at home. I want you to say it with me. The main enemy is always at home. The main enemy is always at home. The main enemy is always at home. A lot of enthusiasm, so it's good to hear that. But what does that mean? What can we do about it? They've got tanks and drones and guns and bombs, and we've just got us. That's it. That's all we've got. We've just got us. And how do we turn us from victims, right, from people that they decide our lives, into the people who actually call the shots? We do it by organizing. We do it by hitting the streets. We do it by creating resistance. And we create enough resistance that we change everything. We change everything in the world, and we can do that. But we've got to fight. I work a full-time job, cutting steel, cutting wood, building shit. And it's a hard job. It's an honest, good union job, but it's a hard job, and I get tired. I get tired every day from the hard work I do. I get tired from seeing the endless oppression. I get tired from having to organize and build struggle. But we've got to keep on. We can't get tired. You are never going to be able to free yourself if you get tired. You are never going to be able to put an end to these injustices if you get tired. Or if you do get tired, you've got to keep going. No matter how tired we get. Today, all across the country, people are coming out. From New York to Los Angeles, and also Salt Lake City, Utah.
Woo! Woo!
And when we see the newspaper article, we're not just gonna see a bunch of liberals in New York and liberals and hippies in California stood against war. We're gonna see Salt Lake City, Utah. We're gonna see Minneapolis. We're gonna see Chicago. We're gonna see people just like you all across the country standing up and fighting back. And we have to do that every day. Get up every day and carry on that fight, because that's the only way we can stop it. They can talk about how bad ISIS is and the humanitarian crisis, but when they talk about Iraq, we say troops out now. Not within a planned status of force agreement, not with some indeterminate point in the future. Barack Obama promised to end the wars. And now we got more wars than when he started. When they talk about Afghanistan, we say troops out now.
Now!
Say it with me. Troops out now. And when we talk about Iraq, they
Troops out now.
and Syria,
Troops out now.
South Korea,
Troops out now.
Germany,
Troops out now.
And we got to do that every single day. And for those of you who know me, you know, I'm a pretty dark guy. You know, I've been doing this a long time. I get pretty tired, but I carry on. But I can honestly say, I've never been happier in my life to know the people that I see here today, to know the people who make this happen, to know Sarah Simmons, who put this together, even though she was tired, and works a real job, and you know, it's people like you that make it happen. And we can make it happen, and we must make it happen, and we will make it happen. Thank you very much.